Joey Lavello says the Snakes can still make the postseason, so despite selling several stars at the deadline, maybe they're in with a shot? We're breaking down all that and more right now on the Dbacks podcast.
Perdomo makes the play.
And a high fly ball. No doubt about this. Home run Marte.
They're going to send them all the way around. Corbin Carroll with an inside the park answer back.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back after a hot minute to the Dbacks podcast. We're back bringing you all the hottest Arizona Diamondbacks tea and talk from across the pond here in London. We're proud to be Arizona's #1 baseball and beverage podcast. It's been a while since I last sat down at this desk with my cup of tea and talked about Diamondbacks baseball. I've been busy. I've been gallivanting around Europe, in the Czech Republic, talking ball with some amazing people for the WBSCE. So make sure to get onto Instagram at Dbacks Podcast and at baseball_Europe, where you can see all of the coverage I've been putting together as Great Britain baseball historically sent an under-23 side to go to Třebíč in the Czech Republic, and they won Britain's first baseball event since 1939 with an incredible comeback win, overcoming a 7-run deficit to beat the Czech Republic 9-7 in the final in Třebíč against a rowdy home crowd, and it was such an incredible experience to be there. So I just want to say thank you to the guys who gave me the opportunity to go and create some content and do that. I'm never going to forget that. But while I was gone, a lot has been happening for the D-backs. It's been a total late summer blowout sale at Chase Field. The front office has been selling high on most, if not all, of the team's star performers, so unless you've been living under a rock, it was pretty depressing to see some of that stuff happening. Let me give you a quick roundup just to recap everything that's gone. Going out the door was first baseman Josh Naylor, third baseman Eugenio Suarez to Seattle Mariners. Randall Grichuk, the right fielder/DH for the Diamondbacks, has gone to Kansas City. Merrill Kelly, starting pitcher, has gone to the Texas Rangers. And relief pitcher closer Shelby Miller has gone to Milwaukee, along with starting pitcher Jordan Montgomery and their massive salary. In return, the Diamondbacks received Texas's number 5 and number 9 prospects in Cole Drake, left-hand pitcher, Mitch Bratt, left-hand pitcher. They received right-hand pitcher David Hageman, Texas's number 23 prospect. First baseman Tyler Locklear, number 9 prospect out of Seattle, along with Seattle's 16th, 27th, 13th, and 16th round prospect picks. So that's Hunter Scranton, right-hand pitcher, Juan Burgos, right-hand pitcher, left-hand pitcher Brandon Garcia, and right-hand pitcher Ashton Izzi, as well as right-hand pitcher from Kansas City, Andrew Hoffman. Now, that is a lot of big names coming out the door, and a lot of guys where you're like, I'm not really sure who that is coming back. I'm not really somebody who keeps across prospects outside of the Diamondbacks system. Obviously, I'm very keen on a few of our guys, but immediately bullpen available arms at a close to MLB or MLB quality were something the D-backs sorely needed. Kevin Ginkel went back on the IL. Jaden Beeks picked up another injury. So it's been a solid procession of guys from Reno who probably weren't ready, probably weren't quite the quality that was required, but were all that the D-backs really had available coming up. Like, there's been some success stories, like Anthony DeScalfani has come in out of free agency, and he's actually looked pretty good. But at the same time, there's other dudes who perhaps we had to say, they didn't really make the cut. So going and getting some prospect arms who could be available immediately in some cases was probably the right move for the D-backs, especially after the deadline day sweep loss kind of forced Mike Hazen's hand a little bit. But plenty of people agree right now that the Diamondbacks were soft sellers. It wasn't like we just gave up nothing and got nothing in return. We gave up a lot of big assets, but we did get usable returns on those investments. So let's give you a little recap there. Tyler Locklear coming in. He's grabbed that starting first baseman spot after making 16 starts for Seattle last year. He batted .156, 3 RBIs, 2 homers in a somewhat limited stint. But he's shown glimpses of immense talent so far through 3 series versus the A's and the Padres and the Rockies, and seemingly halts the D-backs' reliance on Pavin Smith at first base. Also coming in gives critical development time and patience for potential future first baseman and one of the stars of this show's intro cameo, Ivan Melendez. Gives him time to continue his growth at AAA Reno, having come up and hit his first AAA homer recently. Another guy who's come in and has immediately gone onto the Major League roster is right-hand pitcher Andrew Hoffman, who was acquired in the Randall Grichuk trade, and he's looked impressive so far too. In 2025, through 40 innings in AAA, he had thrown to a 2.25 ERA with 55 Ks, 10 base on balls, and no runs given up in his first 3 appearances in Diamondbacks Purple, and got his first career win in the process. So he very much seems to be a good pickup. We also saw a departure with the man third on the Diamondbacks all-time wins list leaving for Texas, and it was a particularly crushing blow for me to see Merrill Kelly depart, traded for 2 of Texas's top 10 prospects. Merrill has been the closest thing the Snakes have had to an ace this year, going 9-6 in 25 for the D-backs with a 3.22 ERA. He was approaching the twilight of their career, but after 6 years at the D-backs following their arrival from rebuilding their career in Korea with the SK Wyverns, who are now known as the SSG Landers, it's the Desert Mountain High School alumni who departs really inches, millimeters away from being D-backs legend status, I think. You look at the guys who are ahead of him in the all-time wins list. I'll pull that up now. D-backs all-time wins list. Obviously, no prizes for guessing who's number 1. That's obviously the big unit, Randy Johnson. But then number 2, Brandon Webb, and he is such a good pitcher. Remember him for the Diamondbacks. The guy behind him, Zach Gallen, is 4th ahead of Kurt Schilling. But number 3 on that list is pretty good company for Merrill Kelly. So it's a tough departure to take, especially seeing him go to Texas, who ultimately, probably still in with a shot of making the postseason, but they're nowhere near the team that they were in 2023, and we'll talk a little bit about that later, as they're an upcoming series for the Diamondbacks. But hey, I like to find a silver lining, so we will always have that 8 strikeout Game 6 versus the Phillies in October of 2023 in the NLCS to look back on, and ultimately, a World Series Game 2 win. That is no small feat for any pitcher's resume either. So Merrill Kelly, thank you for your service. You're a fantastic Diamondback. I have one of the more random jerseys in my collection, with one from your time in Korea sitting in my wardrobe, and thank you for your time at the Diamondbacks, and hopefully we won't miss you too much, depending on how good these pitchers turn out to be. Following Merrill's exit, strong pitching options were very much needed for the D-backs, and another one who impressed on their debut was Juan Burgos, as another part of the Gino Suarez trade. He struck out 2 back-to-back, including the second with bases loaded in a save opportunity on his debut versus the Rockies on August 9th. And from his profile, he looks like a very good pickup. He's got a pitch mix, 5 pitches, sweeper, cutter, sinker, curve, and a changeup. Baseball Savant has him 90th percentile for XBA and chase percentage, so there's very much an arm to develop there. He's got a very similar profile in terms of turning his traditional fastball into a cutter and then alternating off of that. It's very similar to Corbin Burns, actually, so maybe being in and around the same pitching environment. I know Corbin's injured at the moment, but maybe being in and around that environment will really turn Juan Burgos into an interesting relief option for the D-backs. He's not the biggest. He's only 6 foot tall compared to some other guys like Dan Egan, who we've got down in Double A at the moment, who's absolutely excelling, who's got a big lanky frame and uses all of it in his pitching motion. But somebody who can come in and immediately get out of a jam in an MLB debut, that's a good pitcher to have. I'll take that. Now, let's address the elephant in the room and the main talking point of this episode. Obviously, Eugenio Suarez has departed the Diamondbacks. He had said earlier in the season that he wanted to retire at the Diamondbacks. He wanted to finish his career here, and he had no intention of really leaving or being in a hurry to leave if the D-backs did turn into sellers. But he was dealt to Seattle Mariners, which ultimately is probably one of the better places he could have gone. He didn't go to one of the D-backs rivals, really. He's obviously a former Seattle player. People love him there. He was well received. He did look happy to be there. Torey Lovello said, he'd already changed his profile picture to a Seattle one when Torey called to say goodbye to him and thanks for his service, but Gino's been loved everywhere he's gone, and D-backs still very much retain a chance of maybe going and getting him in his free agency this offseason, maybe bringing him back for next year if the rebuild's looking like it's going to be strong straight out of the gate. But yeah, losing him did seem inevitable for a very long time, and there's no immediate replacement available for his power, his presence, and his overall star quality at third base. But baseball fans probably can already guess of what I'm going to say here. It's the old baseball Moneyball cliche, which is develop in the aggregate. At the moment, the Diamondbacks are continuing to struggle with a long injury list despite the haul of young arms through the door, but combined with the fact that there's been a lot of departures means there's a lot of space on the roster, and that we're going to see some young developing bats coming up again from either from rehab or from AAA. The first one of those I want to talk about is Adrian Del Castillo, who cranked one out of the park yesterday, taking advantage of Gabby Moreno's spot being up for grabs while he's on the 60-day IL. At catcher, James McCann had been the replacement side, and he looked pretty good, ran the bases well, had big, strong athletic presence, decent enough bat, and obviously that represents an improvement over the likes of Jose Herrera, who is primarily a defensive first catcher. But ADC had such a strong bat in his limited stint last year. It's so good to see that return to the majors this year. So far, he's got a 255 average, 12 hits, 7 RBIs, and 1 homer in 14 games so far, rotating behind the plate with McCann and Herrera. So that gets you a little bit of Gino's power back in the lineup, but those are very big cleats to fill on the diamond. But cometh the hour, cometh the power, cometh the man. It's opened the opportunity for number 9, Blaze Alexander, to step back into the major leagues. Now, aside from having one of the best leagues in baseball, he'd been bouncing around the roster since late June. He's scraping appearances in. He'd played second, he'd played short, he'd played third. There's consideration he might play center field at spring training at one point this year. But that doesn't seem to be a thing that's going to happen now. Obviously, Alec Thomas has broken back out. Really took advantage of being able to come back up after a rough time of the year. First half of the year for Jake McCarthy, Alec Thomas has really come in, and that We Are All Witnesses Nike advert that you see on the way to Chase Field, I think perhaps a little more validated than it was at the start of the year when Alec Thomas didn't really seem like he came in starting particularly well. But Blaze Alexander, since Gino's departure, has really made third base his starting position to lose, and he really fended off maybe the likelier option in terms of guys we'd have liked to have seen given time to develop, taking as much of an advantage as we can out of Gino's departure. Blaze Alexander has fended off that spot, and we could have seen Tim Tower, we could have seen Jordan Lawler, but no, it's Blaze Alexander who's there. And so far, Blaze has 2 homers in the month of August, batting .387 on the month with a .500 OPB. And his first of the year was crucial in the 7th inning, sparking a turnaround win against the A's, which ended the 6-game losing streak for the Diamondbacks. And Blaze has had much more of a galvanizing effect for those around him than you might think for such a young guy. And he is very much a reliable option in bigger and bigger moments with the more at-bat development time he gets. His defense has been questioned fairly often last year, but it does seem to have improved now, sitting just below league average in the 49th percentile compared to the 28th spot he was in last year. But his base running, which is, according to Baseball Savant, in the 87th percentile, is a big upgrade on Gino, who obviously being a power bat was not the quickest around the bases. And that signals a change perhaps in how the Diamondbacks might try and approach playing baseball for the rest of the year and moving forward. Having speed on the bases and something we've always been quite good at. You've got likes of Corbin Carroll, Alec Thomas, Geraldo Perdomo, who are all pretty nippy, but getting in guys who aren't going to represent obvious weaknesses in terms of chasing, stealing, maybe going back to that create chaos philosophy a little bit, balancing things out a bit is good. And obviously we've seen a little bit less of the, weaker swinging Corbin Carroll. He's turned himself more into a power bat than just primarily relying on his speed tool this year, and seen the productivity change. But changing that style a little bit and filling in where you can for what you're losing in other areas, if that's going to work, I have no complaints about it. And of course, it's the D-backs management that's the big talking point today. with Torey Lovello coming out with the comment that he is not going to consider the Diamondbacks out of the postseason contention until they are mathematically eliminated. The way he put it is, until I see an E by the name in the rankings. Now, I love the optimism there from Torey. I think that's exactly the attitude I would want our manager to have, despite all the fire Torey comes across for swapping in and out and making what some would say are inexplicable capitulation decisions in some games. Right now, that elimination is still very much the likely outcome on the year for the Snakes, and the last 3 series were a win versus the A's, a loss to the Padres, and a sweep of the Rockies. But next up, starting tonight, is 3 games against the Texas Rangers, who are 3rd in the AL West, 16:59. Then 4 more in Colorado. The final homestand of the month versus Cleveland and Cincinnati is the prelude to a road trip to Milwaukee, with the month of August concluding at the the Los Angeles Dodgers Stadium. Now, a little bit of a preview. The Rangers are the pantomime villain for many Diamondbacks fans, myself included, who perhaps still haven't gotten over 2023 just yet. Now, they aren't as lights out as that team, not by a long shot, and are noticeably underperforming since that win. They had a bit of a rough 2024. They're a bit better this year, 2025, and obviously acquiring Merrill Kelly. Did suffer a win that turned into a loss in his first start, which was unfortunate, to the point where some people are saying MLB needs to revisit that year for the Texas Rangers and investigate a little deeper if something might have been going on that was perhaps untoward in 2023. But regardless of if you buy into that kind of conspiratorial stuff, they do represent a winnable series for the Diamondbacks if the D-backs can get the balance right between resting guys, starting your strong guys, taking advantage of that, building a lead, and then, of course, the bullpen not blowing it. The main culprit for that recently, obviously, we've seen a bit of a up and down bit for Jalen Beeks, who had been so far a reliable lefty out of the pen, but the main culprit right there now is the Kendall Graveman experiment, which was sort of a win-win scenario in the fact that you weren't gambling very much if he wasn't very good when you signed him out of free agency this year. But yeah, he's not been fantastic since he's returned from the injury list. He started the year on the IL, and we've not seen a super amount of lights-out pitching, shutdown innings out of him. So if the D-backs can either build a big enough of a lead or have good enough pitching to cover a smaller one, that is a series we can go and win against the Texas Rangers. Following that, I won't take up too much airtime trying to draft a plan for the series to beat Colorado. We did just sweep them at Chase Field, and that's off the back of a franchise record 9 consecutive 2-out hits in one inning with 8 runs in the bottom of the 8th on their way to a 13-6 win in the series finale. So, we've proven we can hit current Colorado rocking pitching. Now we just got to go to Coors Field, do it again, and take that extra 20 feet on every homer thanks to the altitude difference. After that, though, I think one of the bigger challenges on the month is going to be the series at Chase Field against the Cleveland Guardians, who are 2nd in the AL Central and, having defeated the White Sox yesterday night, have cut the deficit in the division from 15 to 6 games back and are 8-2 in their last 10 games. But I have identified something very interesting. There is a big reliance for Cleveland on their key players. Jose Ramirez and Kyle Manzardo alone are responsible for just under 30% of the Guardians' run total this year. So if we can figure out a way to deal with them, we can go and take that series too. I'm going to choose to believe that's a thing that, yes, the Diamondbacks actually can do and won't stuff up. The key matchup for me will be against pitcher Brandon Pfaadt in his start in that series, who has a 100% win record in Cleveland in his career, so far giving up 2 runs, 4 hits, and 1 walk in the 2-1-6. He's coming from matching his career win total of 11 with a win yesterday. And with 10 more starts expected for 2025, I can imagine that record breaker will come in there somewhere, and I think it's very possible that does come in Cleveland. So with him scheduled for perhaps the middle start of that series against Cleveland, I think, yeah, Brandon Pfaadt going to go get it, and obviously he's locked into a long-term contract. So along with the likes of Ryan Nelson, though, that's your kind of longer-term starting options with Corbin Burns. Maybe Zach Gallen comes back. Maybe we get a couple more years out of Erod, but Brandon Pfaadt looks to develop well, keep the momentum rolling for him. Speaking of starting pitchers, it's another one, Zach Gallen, the milkman, who is another guy I'm pegging to be key to any outsider shot at a wildcard spot. he was one of the guys who was very widely expected to be dealt as a trade in the deadline approaching free agency at the end of this year. But the D-backs either couldn't raise any attention or thought he was worth hanging on to. He was clearly rejuvenated on his first start after the deadline. Maybe having that confidence that the D-backs didn't want to get rid of him was a bit of a shot in the arm for him. And the right-hander had 1-2-3 inning and prevented the A's from mounting much of a threat. Tyler Soderstrom's 2-run double in the third in that game against the Athletics was just about the only hiccup for Zach Gallen. It had been a pretty subpar year for the once ace of the rotation, but he's very much started to show signs of improvement recently. If you look at his ERA month by month by month, in May it was 5.50, July it was 6.23, June it was 6.23, July it was 5.10, but August so far is an ERA of just 2.25, so there is very much signs there. If you look at his analytics, his command is returning, the velocity is staying consistent, and his last start on Saturday against Colorado saw him K6 through 6 innings. So perhaps all hope is not lost after all for the number 23, and if we're keeping him happy, there is all the more chances he signs whatever contract the Diamondbacks put in front of him come autumn. I'd said very much earlier on in the year on the show that, the worse Zach Gallen gets, the more chances we have of getting him to just, sign a qualifying offer and just rebuild him next year. But if the rebuild's already starting now and maybe there's, a verbal agreement in place that, if he can get back to showing signs of that quality that we all know he has, that the D-backs will offer him a certain amount. Gallen before said, in his free agency, he'll go wherever offers him the most money and he's going to be practical when he thinks about that. But, a 1-2-3 punch with, Burns, Gallen, and then Fart next year, I like that. Losing Merrill Kelly is a blow, but I still like that as your three big starting pitcher guys before you even consider what you're going to do with, younger guys, somebody like Yumin Lin or Yilba Diaz. I'm going to come in and maybe fight for a spot. Erod's still going to be contracted, so maybe you'll see him. But we have managed, crucially, to offload Jordan Montgomery's salary. That was part of the Shelby Miller trade going to Milwaukee. We said, okay, we will trade you Shelby Miller if you will take Jordan Montgomery and his big-ass contract. And I think that was a very shrewd thing for Mike Hazen to go and have done there. So, we're looking okay. I don't think we're looking fantastic, but I definitely don't think, all is lost on the year for the Diamondbacks. But I would like to put in a quick shout-out to one of the debutants, MLB debutants for the Diamondbacks this year, which is number 30 outfielder Tristan English. He wasn't anything super special, really, when he came up from Reno. He played 7 games, collecting 2 hits for an 0.91 average. But he did get 1 RBI on a double, and that came off of Paul Skeens, so that's a pretty cool way to pick up your first MLB RBI, it must be said. But a really cool little detail for this English Diamondbacks fan is to go onto rattlerepublic.com, which is the Diamondbacks shop, and see a jersey with English stitched on the back. So that might be worth a pickup alone. Tim Tower didn't answer the call earlier in the year for a signed jersey on this show, because Tim clearly wasn't a listener. But Tristan, if you're listening, maybe I'll have better luck with you. You know where to find me at Dbacks on Instagram. I'm also going to give a second shout out to the episode before we tie everything up, as I am turning this one into an Oscars speech slightly. And I'm going to borrow from one of my favorite football podcasts. So yes, that is Soccer to My American Friends. It's a reference to Three Lads in the Pub style dub of the week. And that goes to Jen Powell, who became the first female umpire in a regular season MLB game on Saturday. And she did a quality job in a Braves victory over the Marlins. The best way you can do a good job in the umpire is if people don't notice your performance, you just get calls right and you're consistent, and they did exactly that. So, Jen, fantastic job. Really cool to see you blazing that trail. Congratulations. I am going to wrap up the episode there, but I'm glad to have found plenty of reasons to be optimistic for the Diamondbacks left in the tank. Next week's episode might be delayed as well, as I'm going to be back in the Czech Republic coming to cover the Women's European Baseball Championship. So make sure you stay tuned to my socials to see what I'm up to there. So that's at Dbacks Podcast on Instagram and on X, and at Dbacks on TikTok, and I'll see you then. Make sure you subscribe and follow whatever it is that you're listening to the show, and thank you very much for your support. Goodbye.